"You're too old to fight." 4 words, said with a smirk, to a man who once fought when the whole world was on fire. He didn't argue. He just laced up his boots and said 5 words back that made the entire gym go cold. What happened next would leave a room full of phones recording, and not one of them laughing anymore. Before we continue, if stories like this move you, hit subscribe. Every week we bring you the untold stories of veterans, hidden heroes, and the quiet strength most people never see. You won't want to miss what happens next. You're too old to fight. 4 words, said with a smirk, said to a man who had once fought when the entire world was on fire. The old man didn't answer. He just kept lacing up his worn boots, hands steady despite the decades behind them. Around him, the gym had gone quiet, the kind of quiet that happens right before something nobody in the room is ready for. The young black belt was 26, undefeated in local tournaments, surrounded by students who treated him like a legend. He'd built a name here, a following, a throne made of trophies and Instagram highlight reels. He looked at the retired Marine, grey hair, weathered hands, a slight limp he'd carried since a night in a country most of these kids couldn't find on a map, and saw an easy target. A punchline, content for his next video. What he didn't see was the scar tissue on the old man's knuckles, the kind that doesn't come from a dojo, the kind that comes from doors that had to be broken down, and men who never came home. 31 years earlier, that same old man had led a fire team through hell and walked out the only one still breathing. He never told anyone that story, not his neighbors, not his own son. Some things aren't meant to be told, they're meant to be carried. But today, in this gym, under fluorescent lights and the eyes of a dozen phones already recording, that silence was about to break. The Marine finished tying his boots. He stood up slowly, too slowly, the black belt thought, smirking wider. Then he said 5 words that made the whole gym go cold. "All right, son, let's begin." The black belt laughed, but it came out thinner than he meant it to. Something about those 5 words didn't sound like an old man agreeing to be humiliated. It sounded like a door closing behind him, and only one of them knew where the exit was. "Rules are simple," the black belt said, circling now, playing to the cameras. "First takedown wins. Try not to break a hip, old-timer." The crowd chuckled. The Marine didn't. He stood in the center of the mat, weight balanced, hands loose at his sides, not in some rehearsed stance, but in the kind of stillness you only find in men who've stood in doorways not knowing what was on the other side. 31 years ago, that stillness had a name. His unit called it Sergeant Cole's ghost stance, the moment before violence, when his eyes went flat and his breathing slowed, like his body already knew what his mind hadn't caught up to yet. Men who served under him said the scariest thing about Cole wasn't his strength. It was how calm he stayed when everything else was falling apart. The black belt lunged first, fast, sharp, textbook. It never landed. One shift, one redirect, and suddenly the young champion was on the mat, staring up at the ceiling, ears ringing, utterly unable to explain what just happened. Gasps rippled through the gym. Phones shook in stunned hands. Cole didn't gloat. He simply looked down, voice quiet enough that only the front row heard it. "You train for points, son. I trained to come home." Nobody laughed now. Because what none of them understood, what was about to unravel in front of the entire gym, was that this wasn't a demonstration. It was a memory. And somewhere in that crowd, someone had just recognized the name Cole from a story they'd only ever heard as a rumor. A woman near the back of the gym went pale. "Wait," she whispered, gripping her phone tighter. "Sergeant Cole? Is that the Cole from Fallujah?" Nobody heard her over the noise, except one man standing near the door, who had walked in only to pick up his daughter from class. He froze mid-step, staring at the old Marine now offering the stunned black belt a hand up off the mat. Because he knew that name too. Not from a rumor, from a memory that still woke him up at 3 a.m., sweating, reaching for a rifle that wasn't there. His name was Danny Ruiz. 23 years ago, he was a 19-year-old private, pinned down in a building that was collapsing around him, certain he was about to die in a country that would never remember his name. Then a voice cut through the chaos, calm, steady, impossible to ignore. "Ruiz! Eyes on me. We're not dying in this room today." Cole had carried him 300 meters through gunfire on a leg that was already bleeding through his boot. Ruiz never got the chance to say thank you. 2 weeks later, Cole was rotated out, injured, quiet, gone. No goodbye, no forwarding address, just a name that turned into a legend, whispered in veteran circles for decades. Ruiz hadn't seen him since. Until now, in a gym, wearing a Marine Corps cap, just humbled a cocky 26-year-old without breaking a sweat. The black belt, meanwhile, sat on the mat rubbing his shoulder, humiliation burning hotter than the pain. He looked up at Cole, confused, almost angry. Who even are you?" Cole extended a hand, pulling him to his feet. "Just an old man who forgot how to stay retired." But across the room, Danny Ruiz was already walking forward, tears building in his eyes, about to say 6 words that would change everything in that gym. "Sergeant Cole, you saved my life." The gym went silent again, but this silence felt different, heavier, sacred almost. Cole turned slowly, and for the first time all day, the calm in his eyes cracked. He studied the man walking toward him, the jawline, the eyes, something familiar, buried under 23 years of growing up. "Ruiz?" he said, voice barely above a whisper. "Danny Ruiz?" "Yes, sir." Danny's voice broke on the word sir. "You carried me out of that building. You didn't even know if you were going to make it yourself, and you still came back for me." The black belt stood frozen near the mat, forgotten mid-humiliation, watching something unfold that made his entire ego feel embarrassingly small. Cole's hands, the same hands that had just thrown a 26-year-old champion to the ground without effort, were now trembling. "I looked for you," he said. "After the hospital. Nobody would tell me if you made it." "I made it," Danny said, stepping closer. "Because of you. I have 2 kids now, a wife, a whole life you gave me that night." His voice cracked completely, "and I never got to say thank you." Around them, phones that had been recording a viral takedown video were now capturing something far more powerful, something that would spread not because it was entertaining, but because it was real. The young black belt stood there, humiliation forgotten, staring at the 2 men in front of him. Slowly, something shifted in his expression. The trophies on his wall, the followers, the undefeated record. None of it had ever meant anything close to this. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, stepping forward. "I had no idea who you were." Cole turned to him, and for the first time, offered something warmer than silence. "Son," he said, "you didn't need to know who I was. You just needed to learn. Respect isn't about age. It's about what a man's carried, and what he's still carrying." The black belt swallowed hard, nodding, something in him breaking open for the first time in years. But Cole wasn't finished. He looked back at Danny, and then at the crowd, and took a breath like a man about to open a door he'd kept locked for over 2 decades. "There's something else," he said. "Something none of you know. Something I never told anyone, not even my own family." The entire gym leaned in, because the story they thought they understood was about to become something none of them saw coming. Cole took a slow breath, the kind of breath men take before setting down something they've carried for years. "That night in Fallujah," he said, "I didn't go back for Danny because I was following orders. Command had already called it. Buildings collapsing, positions compromised, pullback. That's what I was told. I disobeyed a direct order to go back in." Gasps rippled through the gym. Danny's eyes widened. He'd never known that part. "I was court-martialed for it," Cole continued. "Not for saving a man's life, for disobeying command. They gave me a choice: quiet discharge, no benefits fight, no public record, or a trial that would have dragged Danny's name and mine through hearings for years while he was still in a hospital bed fighting to walk again." He looked at Danny, voice steady, but eyes glistening. "I chose to disappear so you could just heal. No cameras, no headlines, no thank yous. I told myself that was enough." The gym was dead silent. Even the black belt, still standing there humbled, felt his throat tighten. "For 23 years, Cole said, I told myself I did the right thing. But some nights, I wondered if anyone even remembered, if it even mattered." Danny stepped forward and did something nobody expected. He pulled Cole into a hug, gripping him like he might disappear again if he let go. "It mattered," Danny said, voice breaking. "Every single day of my life, it mattered." One by one, people in the gym started clapping. Not the loud, hollow kind for a viral fight video, but something quieter, something that came from actually understanding what they'd just witnessed. The black belt walked forward last. He extended his hand, not for a photo, not for content, but because for the first time he understood what real strength looked like. It wasn't a trophy. It wasn't a belt. It wasn't going undefeated. It was a man who gave up everything, twice, and never once asked for credit. "Sergeant Cole," he said quietly, "thank you for the lesson. All of them." Cole shook his hand, the corner of his mouth finally lifting into something like a smile. "Just remember, son, real strength doesn't need an audience. It just needs a reason." As the crowd slowly dispersed, phones lowering, the video already spreading online, not as a comedy clip, but as something that would move an entire country by morning, Cole looked at Danny one last time. "You did good, kid," he said. "You did real good." And for the first time in 23 years, Sergeant Cole walked out of that building not carrying the weight alone. Some heroes don't wear their medals. They wear their silence, until the moment finally comes to set it down.